Not too long ago, I encountered somebody that I could only describe as fascinating. This was a person who one might also describe as being in a state of blue pill ecstasy. I know nobody really uses that phrase, but at least that's how it came off to me. And I took the time to talk to this gentleman for a while because he really was just that interesting. And I'll explain why. This guy was what you would refer to as blue pill. He wasn't aware of very much of anything as pertains to the internet. He wasn't aware of the memes. He certainly wasn't aware of the pills. He wasn't aware of any of that stuff. And oddly enough, or not so oddly enough, he seemed like a pretty happy-go-lucky individual. He was originally from Brazil, but grew up in the United States. And as we went through the conversation, I discovered more and more about him, that he was quite short, in fact, 5'5", and that he was aware of this, but that he never allowed his height to deter him from the things he wanted to acquire. He had a girlfriend, and he had had his experiences with women. And the whole time I was thinking, at least partly, this is all going to blow up on him. Guy is 34, and he's not aware of any of these things. But at the same time, I also realized that some people are just better off that way. And I thought it was both amazing and a good thing that this particular gentleman wasn't aware of anything outside of the things in front of his own nose. And by that, I don't mean anything condescending. I really don't. I simply mean that he has what he has to work with, and he hadn't taken the time to look outside of the box or think outside of the box with respect to humans, with respect to women, with respect to himself. And I'm actually going to argue that that's a good thing. You see, many years ago, I thought it was of primary importance to what could only be called proselytize, to red pill everyone, and each and every man you'd encounter. You'd want to red pill them. Of course, Morpheus has that interjection in the film that some people will be resistant to that process, and that's absolutely true. But the real question is, how beneficial is it ultimately to do so? And some years later, I realized that, maybe it's not the best idea to red pill everybody. And many years later, one could say, I've come to the conclusion, with all their attendant goofiness, that these pills are kind of poison for the majority of people. Now, I want you to imagine, by way of analogy, an allergy. Something like 1% of the population has a peanut allergy, depending on which year you're looking at, depending on the country, but give or take. Doesn't seem like a big deal. So it also doesn't seem like a big deal to say, look, don't eat peanuts. But what if, for example, the peanut allergy rate was 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%, 85%? Then you would certainly be a lot more cautious with your proclamations about whether or not you should eat peanuts. You would say, you're probably going to be allergic, based solely on stats, to peanuts, so don't eat peanuts. And that's kind of the way I look these days at all these pills. So many flavors and hues and colors. Oh my. Because I think the vast majority of humans, and specifically men, do not receive the pill as well. And I think in most cases, these pills end up poisoning the men in question. They're not nutritious, by way of analogy. They're going to cause an allergic reaction. And some of these men might die from them. Now, I'm not saying this simply for the sake of saying this. When I make a statement like that, it's based on years of observation. It's actually based on, to some degree, a body count I've noticed of personal friends and of other people I've known who, frankly speaking, have lost their minds as a consequence of becoming pilled. We'll call it that. And so one needs to ask the question in such a scenario, is it a good thing? And I'm arguing here, in general, broadly speaking, it is not. Now, on the face of it, it seems like what I'm arguing is absurd. Flailing and wailing about in the darkness of the blue pill, not aware of your surroundings and why you're behaving a certain way, why everyone else is behaving a certain way, and above all, why women are behaving a certain way. But let me walk you through the process. Sure, there's a lot of pain in a quote-unquote blue pill worldview perspective, but it's also inspirational. How do these things start? How does the cascade of decay and internal destruction start? Well, usually it begins with the so-called red pill. Red pill aware, as some people might say. And you learn that all is not as it seems. The fairy tales you've been told were not true. And initially in this phase, what it does is it creates a sense of urgency to understand. And there's a joy in understanding initially, connecting the dots. It's a bit like understanding some kind of complicated mathematical problem or some other mechanical challenge. You connect the dots. You begin to understand why women are a certain way, why they behave a certain way, why you behave a certain way. But it doesn't stop there because you need to continue to connect the dots. And so it goes from a red pill understanding to a further understanding of all the bits and pieces, the cogs and the wheels of the society that you dwell in. And it doesn't stop there. It keeps on going. Eventually, whether it's accurate or not, you might think that you've understood it all. And guess what? All that understanding has given way to what some might call the black pill. Yes, what I'm saying is the quote-unquote red pill is normally a pipeline to the so-called black pill. A lot of people out there mistakenly believe that the so-called black pill is simply a matter for quote-unquote incels and losers and what have you. But I've seen countless examples of the opposite. I had a friend, I'd like to think a good friend, whose journey followed this trajectory very much. Now, this was a good-looking guy, pretty smart, had a lot of things going for him. Originally, he had a sense of faith, a professed Catholic, but his belief in his religion wore off in time. He lost his faith in Catholicism and God. And then he discovered the red pill, which was further substantiated by real-life experiences that he had had, which is often the case, let's be honest. And then he discovered more and more about the world. The red pill became muddy. Eventually it transitioned into a black pill. And I at least partly bore witness to this transformation. This particular gentleman, we can call him my former friend simply because, well, he's probably not with us anymore. Or if he is, he won't be much longer. And he started that journey, and bit by bit, all that understanding that he couldn't deny, the knowledge he had acquired that he couldn't deny, eventually led to his destruction. He tried to counter it. Every now and then there would be a spark of hope. Maybe I can do this. Maybe I can do that. But in the end, all reality did to him was crush him, destroyed his hopes and dreams, until there was nothing left but an empty husk of a former human being. Now, I think that tale is illustrative and not necessarily representative of everyone, because it's obvious that we're all individuals and that we all react differently to different scenarios and situations and information presented to us. I've known other individuals, for example, who didn't go down that route, but noticeably their characters had worsened, that they became very unpleasant people as a result of this pilling process. You see, human beings need hopes and dreams and desires. And when you scrape away the layers of these hopes and dreams, as effete and ethereal and immaterial as they might be, oftentimes there's not a whole lot left. Everything becomes clinical. Everything becomes a question of cogs and wheels, bits that you fit here and there. For example, how many pet owners who love their pets, love their dogs and cats, think they're so cute and delightful, really want to spend that much time thinking about the distinct possibility, which is well recorded, that should they pass away in their homes, their favorite canine or feline will happily feast upon their face as a source of nutrition, sustenance, and meat. Probably not many. Now, some people might be able to reconcile that difference, but a lot of people who look at their pets, their dogs and cats, in a particular bubble, as it were, well, for a lot of them it would be a huge shock to realize that, yes, there are a number of cases that indicate that both cats and dogs will devour their owners upon their passing, because they're animals, right? And all of a sudden, they're not fluffy and cute anymore. They're just animals. That's all they are. They seem to do certain things, but the seeming is really just a layer of interpretation that we thrust upon the animal in this case. It's not something that's real. And so, this applies fundamentally to everything in life. If you begin to dissect everything down to the smallest bits, the constituent parts, what happens is it sucks the joy out of life. After all, the vast majority of people don't want to think about Henry the German Shepherd devouring their lifeless faces, or Luna the cute cat eating their noses with their fine raspy tongues. No, it's better to simply look at them as cute, to remove the animal from these animals. And therefore, it's also better to, in many cases, not understand. Oh, but Stardust, these people will founder and flail in the darkness. Of course they will. But you know what's going to rescue them from their state of ignorance? These hopes and dreams. You can call them delusions. Call them whatever you want. Things that aren't real, whose substance is unsubstantiated. That's going to keep them going until the end of their days. And after all, isn't that what we're all in it for here? We've had this life thrust upon us. We didn't ask for it. And we are called to task by the gods to get from A to Z. Some people don't get to, quote-unquote, Z, the end of the line by, quote-unquote, natural causes, right? But we're called to task for that. We are required, in some sense, to do that. And obstacles towards that end are going to make things that much more difficult, which is not to say that there are no obstacles outside of that. Of course there are. But dissecting and deconstructing everything until this everything becomes a lifeless lump of meat is not going to inspire you. It's not going to improve your life. I've seen too many men go through this pilling process. And in virtually all cases, they end up in the so-called black pill phase, where everything dissipates. Their energy is sapped. They're not motivated. They don't really feel like doing very much of anything. They barely have a reason to live, and in many cases, they can't find one. That is an unfortunate consequence that applies to so many men who imbibe all of these silly, goofy pills. Now, of course, you have quote-unquote red-pilled men who never become black-pilled, but that's only because they too are partaking of a delusion. Let me give you a good example of this. You've all heard of Rollo Tomassi, famous former PUA writer, and let me give him credit where it's due. The guy is articulate. He's not dumb. In fact, if I were to say there's anyone in the so-called red pill PUA / dating coach / whatever you want to call it community who is articulate, who's actually sometimes somewhat pleasant to listen to, it's Rollo Tomassi. And Rollo Tomassi, uniquely, in this community, has brought up and referenced the fact that the dating scene has changed. It's not the same as it used to be. Old order thinking, he would call it, right? New order thinking, old order thinking. The Petersons of the world, they belong to the old order thinking in terms of mating and dating. But Rollo, to his credit, keeps his finger on the pulse of things. And he will say, yes, 80% of men are unattractive to women. 80-20 rule, right? Something we've heard countless times by now. This is not a unique statement, but it is at least rare and unusual in those circles. And so he acknowledges this. But his acolytes, his followers, would also have to acknowledge this, theoretically. But here's the paradox. Here's the contradiction, right? Of course, if only 20% of men are attractive to women, what happens to the 80%? And it begs the question, is this a fluid thing? Can this be overcome? Because to this day, Rollo uses terminology such as alpha and beta, which probably has its place from a very clinical perspective. But the question is, can somebody who is alpha drop down to beta? And perhaps even more important, can somebody who is beta advance to alpha? Well, these are interesting questions. I'm not sure if Rollo has a good answer to that. I believe he would say yes. And why? Why would he say yes? Because that is his product. You see, logically, if 80% of men are not attracted to women, all this red pill crap, all the PUA stuff, game, right, is going to be reasonably useless because these men will always be quote-unquote betas. They cannot ascend. Some large percentage of them will never transition from quote-unquote beta to quote-unquote alpha. In fact, if these men are listening to Rollo Tomassi, they're probably not alphas. Maybe some of them are. Maybe some of them are listening just for confirmation bias or to get off on the words for the sake of their own egos. It's possible. And so there's a conundrum there, right? There's a conundrum because these men are, by definition, in the 80%, and they won't be attractive to women. Now, where does the delusion come in here? Well, these guys are quote-unquote red pill. They understand red pill dynamics. Maybe they're into Evo Psych. They've listened to their Lord and Savior, Rollo Tomassi, who does style himself as a kind of savior. You've probably heard him speak before. Read my book, Preventative Medicine, etc., etc. And so the delusion contained in there is that most of these guys are quote-unquote not alpha. I hate this terminology, but they're not alpha. They never will be. But they're deluding themselves into thinking they're something they are not. And that's what you could call a stopgap. Maybe a dam that would prevent the torrent of water that would otherwise overwhelm them. So that too is a kind of delusion, a self-deception. Fake it until you make it. Although in many cases, in most cases, they don't make it. And so what I'm really arguing here is that people need something to keep them going, whatever it might be. And what they need is oftentimes, maybe in most cases, perhaps, just perhaps in all cases, not going to conform to the underlying reality they inhabit, which is to say, they need to live in something that is unreal, whether it's obtainable or not. They need to live in some system in their own minds and heads that is not actually reflective of themselves and the reality they inhabit. And this is why all of these pills are extremely dangerous. They are pills of poison. Toxic is a word that's bandied about quite a lot these days. I'm not a fan of it. But yeah, for many, many, many individuals, they will be toxic. And so I think ultimately, because of this consequence, because of the fact that these things will ultimately poison the minds of the individuals in question and lead them down the path of damnation, and ultimately, in many cases, destruction, that it's not necessarily a good thing. Now you might say, well, Stardust, you're a black pillar, you're a red pillar, you're all of these things. Yeah, I'm knee deep in it myself. And there's no going back. For people who've accepted these things, there's no going back. With each passing year, I become more and more clinical. I become less and less inspired. But that's what this does, ultimately. It saps the humanity from you. Because there's some quality about being human that is somewhat ineffable, intangible, yes, somewhat delusional. You strip away those layers, and there's just nothing left. And so, what is one to do? Well, I think caution is a byword here. I think caution is absolutely necessary. No proselytizing. We don't need that. If some individual haplessly stumbles into certain facts, and these facts somehow correlate with all these pills, and his thirst for knowledge is relentless, okay. He's already got his feet in the water. At some point in time, he'll be knee-deep, and probably eventually he'll drown. But you might as well help him to cushion that fall, because he's already there. But as Morpheus said, some people never want to be unplugged from the Matrix, and that's a good thing. Good for them. Sure, these people will despise they won't like us, people who think like us. Perhaps rightly so. But it's good for them. And frankly speaking, in all my time on YouTube, and all my time discussing these matters, I never wanted to worsen people's lives. I had never wanted to make people lose hope in the things that they had placed their hopes in. I had never wanted for them to become lost. And so everything I'm saying now is a synthesis of all these years of observation, self-reflection, and reflecting upon others. Let's look at the pills like peanuts, with an 85% deadly allergy rate. You don't want to give people peanuts in that scenario. And so you don't want to give most people pills. Because, cheesy as it might sound, the slippery slope is real. Pill after pill after pill until there's nothing left, literally, of the human being in question. And then that same human being physically fades from the world. A work wrought by his own hand because of all those pills he swallowed. And the ones who don't, well, from what I've seen, in some cases, they start to lose their minds. And so that's where I stand these days. Do not pill people unless they're already there. If they're already there, then to the degree they've gotten their feet wet, or they're knee-deep in it, it's probably too late. then I see it as imperative to try to at least cushion the journey. But it's difficult because the kinds of platitudes that are effective in such a scenario will almost inevitably be things that are quote-unquote blue pill, things that have been born of a fantasy realm, a chimera, and they're much less likely to work. So in an ironic twist, because the great Rollo Tomassi refers to much of what he says as preventative medicine. He has a book that he loves referring to, although he's always self-referential, as preventative medicine. Yeah, maybe the real preventative medicine is to allow people to continue to pursue their hopes and dreams in some blue pill fantasy. Maybe that is better than the alternative. I, frankly speaking, think it is. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. Please hit the like button, subscribe if you're not yet a subscriber, hit that bell icon so you can follow my videos. And if I'm still alive, I'll check you out later. May the gods watch over you. Take care. Bye-bye. If you liked this video, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you enjoy my content, please consider making a donation or becoming a patron. Thanks for watching.